Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to American Pulse, he declared as the on-air sign lit up. The audience applauded and Caroline, dressed in an elegant navy suit, sat across from him, crossing her legs. Her blonde hair was neatly tied in a bun, and her eyes radiated confidence. Carolyn Leavitt, thank you for joining us, Thomas began, leaning back in his chair. You become a voice for many who feel their views are ignored in modern America. Let's start with something simple. What drives you? Caroline smiled, but her smile was restrained, as if she were assessing a battlefield. Thank you, Thomas. I'm driven by ordinary Americans, people who work hard, pay taxes, but feel their voices aren't heard in Washington or the mainstream media. I want their stories to be heard. The audience murmured approvingly. A woman in a checkered blouse in the front row nodded, whispering something to her neighbor. Thomas raised an eyebrow, as if expecting more specifics. That sounds noble, but let's get specific. You've recently criticized big city mayors for their policies on crime. Here in Chicago, where we are now, crime rates are a concern. What would you suggest the mayor do differently? Caroline leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. The problem is we're too soft on crime. Police need to be supported with resources, not blamed for every incident. In Chicago, people are afraid to walk the streets at night. I spoke to a mother whose son was killed in street violence. She said, "No one listens until it's too late." We need to restore law and order, not scapegoat law enforcement. The room erupted in applause, though a few people shook their heads. Thomas jotted something in his notebook. A strong stance, he replied. But critics say this approach could heighten tensions between police and communities, especially in predominantly African American neighborhoods. How would you respond to that? Caroline didn't flinch. I believe safety is a right for every community, regardless of race. We're not helping anyone by ignoring reality. The statistics speak for themselves. Over 600 homicides in Chicago last year. People want protection, not political slogans. I'm for dialogue with communities, but it has to be honest. Thomas nodded, but his eyes narrowed. He shifted topics, sensing the conversation could become slippery. Let's move to the economy. Many of our viewers are older, living on pensions or fixed incomes. They're worried about inflation, rising costs for groceries, medications. What's your stance on economic policy? Do you have a plan for these people? Caroline nodded, her tone softening. Absolutely. I grew up in a middle-class family where my parents counted every penny. Today, seniors are forced to choose between groceries and medicine. That's unacceptable. I support tax cuts for the middle class and retirees, as well as reducing bureaucracy that strangles small businesses. If we let people keep more of their money, they can breathe easier. The audience applauded again, but Thomas didn't rush to agree. He set his pen down and looked at Caroline with a slight smile. That sounds like a nice promise, but how do you fund it? Tax cuts mean less revenue. Are you prepared to cut social programs like Medicare, which are so important to our viewers? The question hung in the air. Caroline froze for a moment, her fingers lightly gripping the armrest. The room fell silent, waiting for her response. She opened her mouth to answer, but Thomas suddenly raised his hand. Hold on, Caroline. We have a call from a viewer, and I think you'll want to hear this. He touched his earpiece. Hello, you're on air. Please state your name and question. The voice on the line was sharp, with a slight tremor typical of an older person. My name is Martha, from Evanston. Ms. Leavitt, I heard you talk about honest dialogue, but your comments about minorities seem offensive to me. How can you represent all Americans when your words offend entire communities? Caroline, Thomas began slowly, his voice calm but laced with challenge. Martha raised a serious point. Many feel your comments about minorities come across as generalizations that offend entire communities. How do you respond? Caroline took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing, but she kept her composure. When she spoke, her voice was steady, though tension simmered beneath. Thomas, I respect Martha's opinion, but let me clarify. My words were never aimed at any community. I'm talking about facts, statistics, the reality people face in cities like Chicago. If we can't talk honestly about problems, how do we solve them? I want dialogue, not accusations. The room stirred. Some clapped, but a few voices shouted, "That's generalization." The woman in the checkered blouse in the front row shook her head, whispering to her neighbor. Thomas raised a hand to quiet the crowd, but his next question was like a thrown stone. All right, let's get specific. One issue gripping Americans right now is immigration. According to 2024 Pew Research polls, 59% of Americans see illegal immigration as a serious problem. You've repeatedly called for tougher immigration policies. How do you respond to accusations that such views fuel hatred and xenophobia? The question detonated in the studio like a grenade. Caroline froze for a moment, her eyes flashing, but she quickly regained control. She leaned forward, her voice firmer. Thomas, I'm not fueling hatred. I'm saying what millions of Americans think. Our borders aren't secure. In Chicago, for example, we see how illegal immigration strains schools, hospitals, law enforcement. People want safety and fairness. I'm not against immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. But we need order, not chaos. The room erupted. Part of the audience cheered, shouting exactly, but others booed, and several voices yelled, "That's racism." A man in the second row, wearing a gray cap, stood and shouted, "You're lumping all immigrants together. My family came here legally, but your words offend us all." Caroline turned to him, her face flushing, but she held back her anger. "Sir, I respect your story, but I'm talking about illegal immigration, not those who came legally. Why can't we have this conversation without me being accused of hatred?" Thomas interjected, his voice sharper. "Caroline, your words are often taken as an attack. You said in an interview that some communities don't integrate into American society. That sounds like an accusation against entire groups. Don't you think your tone contributes to division?" Caroline exhaled sharply, her eyes blazing. "Thomas, I'm tired of my words being twisted. I said integration is a two-way street. If we want a strong America, everyone has to work together, not live in isolated enclaves. Why is that taken as an attack? I want unity, but it requires honesty." The room exploded again with shouts, applause, and boos. The woman in the checkered blouse stood, her voice trembling with outrage. "You call that honesty? You're blaming minorities for not being American enough. That's an insult." Caroline snapped back, turning to her. "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying we need to talk about real issues, crime, poverty, education, instead of hiding behind political correctness." Thomas raised both hands, trying to calm the crowd, but his voice barely cut through the noise. Wait. Let's keep this respectful. Caroline, you say you want dialogue, but your words are sparking anger. Are you willing to admit your approach might be part of the problem?" Caroline clenched her fists, her face paling with tension. "Thomas, the problem isn't me. The problem is we can't have an honest conversation without me being called a racist or a xenophobe. I'm saying what people in this country think, and if that offends someone, maybe they should ask why the truth hurts so much." The room erupted in shouts, applause, and jeers. The man in the gray cap shouted again, "Truth? You just want attention, not truth." Caroline stood abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. "I'm not here for attention. I'm here to say what others are afraid to. If you don't want to listen, that's your problem, not mine." Thomas stood, his face stern. "Caroline, please sit down. This show is about dialogue, not fights." But Caroline didn't sit. She looked at Thomas, then at the audience, her eyes burning. If dialogue means I have to stay silent about what I see, then it's not dialogue. It's censorship. She turned sharply and walked off the stage, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. The audience froze, then exploded into a cacophony of shouts, applause, and outraged cries. Thomas stood, watching her go, his face a mix of shock and irritation. "Well," he muttered, turning to the camera, "it looks like tonight's American Pulse got a bit hotter than we expected." Backstage, Caroline stopped, her chest heaving. She could hear the buzz of the audience, the muffled voices of technicians whispering about what had just happened. Her phone vibrated relentlessly in her pocket. She knew this moment would go viral, but there was no triumph in her eyes, only a mix of anger and resolve. Caroline leaned against the wall, her fingers trembling as she removed the microphone from her collar. A technician, a lanky young man in a black t-shirt, hurried over, reaching for the equipment. "Ms. Leavitt, are you okay?" he asked timidly, avoiding her gaze. She shot him a sharp look, but her voice was quiet, almost broken. "I'm fine. Just take this." The technician nodded and quickly disappeared into the dark corridor. Caroline closed her eyes, trying to pull herself together. She could hear Thomas Grayson in the studio attempting to calm the audience, his voice cutting through the chaos, but the words were lost in the din. She knew her exit had become a sensation. Social media was likely already exploding with headlines. Carolyn Leavitt storms off show in heated clash. But she didn't care about likes or views. Something inside her had broken, not from the accusations, not from the shouts, but from the realization that this dialogue she so desperately wanted was just a circus for ratings. The dressing room door creaked open, and the show's producer, Allison Crowe, appeared, a middle-aged woman with a stern face and a tablet in hand. Her heels clacked loudly on the floor, and her eyes gleamed with a mix of irritation and concern. "Caroline, what was that?" she snapped, stopping a few steps away. "You can't just walk off in the middle of a live show. We're on air. People are watching." Caroline slowly turned her head, her gaze cold but burning with resolve. "I didn't walk off, Allison. I'm done. With this show, with this game where words are twisted and truth is trampled for sensationalism." Allison sighed, her tone softening but still tense. "Look, I get that you're upset. Thomas may have pushed too far, but this show is a platform. You could go back, explain your position, calm people down." "Calm people down?" Caroline cut her off sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "You think I came here to calm people? I came to speak the truth, to hear people, to find common ground. But this..." She gestured toward the studio. "This isn't dialogue. It's an arena where people are pitted against each other like dogs for ratings. I won't play that game." Allison pursed her lips, her fingers tightening around the tablet. "Caroline, you signed a contract. You knew the show could be tough. If you walk away now, there'll be consequences for your career, your reputation." Caroline smiled, but there was no joy in it, only exhaustion. "My reputation? Allison, I'm not afraid of headlines. I'm afraid of what we're doing to this country when shows like yours make people hate each other. You don't unite, you divide, and I won't be part of it." She stepped closer to the producer, her voice low but piercing. "Shut this show down. For good. It's not worth the time of the people watching, thinking they'll hear the truth. It's poisoning all of us." Allison froze, her eyes widening. She opened her mouth to respond, but Caroline had already turned and headed for the exit. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor, echoing in the empty corridor. She pushed open the glass doors, and the cool Chicago air hit her face, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and distant car horns. The street was brightly lit, skyscrapers gleaming, but Caroline didn't look back. She walked forward, her silhouette fading into the crowd of passers-by. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in the studio. Thomas Grayson tried to salvage the broadcast, but the audience wasn't listening. Some shouted for Caroline's return, others argued among themselves, and a few simply stood and left, disappointed or outraged. Backstage, Allison stood staring at the door Caroline had exited through. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the network director. "She's gone," Allison said quietly into the phone. "And she wants us to shut down the show." There was silence on the other end. Then a man with a gravelly voice responded. Shut down American Pulse? Is she joking? Allison sighed, her gaze falling on a monitor replaying the moment Caroline walked off. She wasn't joking. And you know what? Some of us might agree with her. The next day, social media exploded. The video of Caroline's exit racked up millions of views, with comments split down the middle. Some called her a hero for standing up to the system, others a provocateur who couldn't handle the heat. But among viewers, especially those over 55, a different conversation took root. In coffee shops, churches, and at family dinners, people talked not just about Caroline, but about what had happened to their country. Why did every conversation turn into a fight? Why was the truth so hard to hear through the noise? A week later, the network announced that American Pulse was pausing broadcasts to rethink the format. Rumors swirled that ratings had plummeted and advertisers were pulling back. No one knew if the show would return. But in Chicago, in small towns across America, people started talking more, not on camera, not for likes, but with each other. About crime, about immigration, about what scared them or gave them hope.